I never thought I'd cry over a cracked foundation and rotting floorboards, but that's exactly what I did the day we got the keys. I stood on the uneven front step of a house no one else wanted, and for the first time in my life, I felt still. Not happy, not proud, just still. Like the wind that had always pushed me from place to place had finally stopped long enough for me to catch my breath. The house was a mess. Paint peeling like sunburned skin, a sagging roof, and a front door that stuck like it was trying to protect whatever was inside from ever coming out again. The staircase leading up to the porch was broken in the middle. One of the wooden steps had fully caved in, and the others weren't far behind. It was dangerous, ugly, and exactly what we could afford. But it was ours. My wife, Alana, had her doubts. She walked the rooms with crossed arms and her mouth in a tight line, the kind of silence that carries its own weather. My kids, Ella and Micah, chased each other through the hallways like the cracks in the walls didn't even exist. Kids don't see decay the way adults do. They see space, possibility. I envied that. I touched the banister of the broken porch steps like it was a relic. I'd lived in 12 different places before I was 16. Some nights I slept in cars, other nights on air mattresses that slowly deflated by morning. My mother did her best, but we were always at the mercy of someone else's notice to vacate. I learned not to grow roots. They got pulled too easily. But this was different. We scraped everything we had to buy it. It needed more work than it should have, but I didn't care. I didn't want perfect. I wanted permanent. I wanted my kids to come home to the same front door every day, to complain about the same creaky floorboard every year. I wanted to give them what I never had: consistency. I remember the exact moment it hit me. Standing there, the sun already dipping behind the trees, casting long shadows over the porch. The broken stairs stared back at me like a dare, and I made a promise right then and there. "The stairs first," I whispered. "We fix the stairs first." It wasn't just about safety. It wasn't even about curb appeal. It was symbolic. You can't enter a new life through something broken. That staircase was the entry point. To the house, yes, but also to the future I was trying to build. If I was going to rewrite my family story, I had to start at the threshold. Later that night, after the kids fell asleep on blankets in the living room, and Alana finally exhaled enough to let herself sit beside me on the bare floor, I told her about the stairs. I told her what they meant. She didn't say much, just rested her head on my shoulder, and after a long pause said, "Then that's where we begin." And so we did. The next morning, I stood in front of the broken steps with a crowbar in one hand and a sense of purpose in the other. Alana had taken the kids to pick up paint samples, something to keep them busy while I worked. It was just me, the house, and the rising heat of the day. I started by pulling up the warped wood one board at a time. The nails squealed in protest, rusted deep into the planks, and I took it as a sign. This house didn't want to give up its old life easily. Each creak, each crack stirred something in me. Like I wasn't just tearing down stairs, I was dismantling years of neglect. It felt personal. I wiped sweat from my brow and kept going, stacking the broken boards neatly to one side, careful not to splinter anything that might be reusable. Then, I hit something that didn't sound like wood. It was subtle at first, a metallic thunk beneath my crowbar, muffled under the dirt and concrete. But I paused, thinking maybe it was a pipe, or some old junk buried during construction. But the sound was off. Not the dull thud of solid metal, but hollow, almost like a bell had been struck under my feet. I knelt down, brushing away years of compacted dirt and debris. The ground felt strange,
Not just soil, but something more solid underneath. I dug with my hands at first, then switched to a small hand shovel I'd brought out with me. It took time, and I was careful not to damage whatever it was. After about 20 minutes of steady digging, I exposed the edge of something rectangular, rusted, and impossibly still. It wasn't just metal, it was deliberate. Not some forgotten tool or scrap piece of piping, it was placed there, buried. A box. I sat back on my heels, heart racing, fingers shaking just a little. The kind of tremble you feel when you realize something simple just became something significant. I'd come out here to fix stairs, not unearth secrets. The house was quiet behind me. The wind moved gently through the trees, and for a second it felt like the world had stopped, like the box had been waiting all this time for someone to find it. And somehow, that someone was me. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at it. Rust flaked off the hinges, and the top was crusted with decades of dirt and time. It was no bigger than a bread box, heavy-looking, with edges that suggested it had once been carefully crafted. Part of me didn't want to touch it. Like if I opened it, I'd be disturbing something sacred. Like I was trespassing into someone else's grief or hope or history. But another part of me, the part that had always craved understanding, couldn't walk away. The stairs forgotten for the moment, I sat beside the half-excavated box until the sun hung high overhead, heat pressing against my back. My hands were dirty, my shirt soaked through, but I couldn't stop looking at it. Because here's the truth. I thought I knew what it meant to rebuild. I thought buying this house and fixing it up would be about us, my family, my past, my need for roots. But that sound beneath the surface, that echo of hollow metal in the soil, it told me something else. The ground I thought was mine might hold more than my story. It might hold someone else's, too.
I didn't tell Alana right away. When she and the kids came home that afternoon, I'd already covered the box back up with a tarp and a couple of loose boards. I told myself it was to keep it safe, but the truth was, I needed time. Time to process what it meant. Time to decide whether I was ready to know. That night I sat in the kitchen, bare walls, dusty counters, and the hum of our old refrigerator like a quiet heartbeat in the background. The box was still out there, waiting. I could feel its presence through the floorboards, like a story pressed into the bones of the house. Next morning I woke up early. The sun hadn't risen yet. I slipped out of bed, grabbed my tools, and went back to the stairs. The kids were still asleep, curled up in blankets on the living room floor, and Alana had one arm draped across her eyes, trying to block the early light. I felt a strange sense of guilt walking past them, like I was about to betray something or someone. But I had to see. I cleared the rest of the dirt around the box and braced myself. The lid resisted at first, rust sealing it shut, but after a few steady taps with the claw of my hammer, it groaned open. The smell hit me first, not rotten, but aged, like old paper in forgotten attics. Inside was a neatly folded stack of newspapers, brown and brittle, their edges flaking with every touch. The headline on the top one read, "Unemployment soars as breadlines grow, October 1932. My breath caught. Beneath the papers were coins, silver dollars, nickels, even a few wheat pennies, all wrapped in wax paper, carefully, intentionally, like someone had preserved them with reverence, not for value, but for meaning. And then the photographs, black and white, faded but clear. A man and woman, standing on a porch, not unlike mine. 3 children between them, 2 boys and a girl, all dressed in Sunday best. The girl's shoes were scuffed, but she stood with a kind of pride that pierced right through the decades. There were more photos. The same family, different poses, one in front of a battered car, one with a birthday cake, one of the father holding the youngest son in his arms. None of them smiling wide, but all of them trying to hold on to something. I sat there in the dirt, the box open on my lap, and I felt it wash over me, a strange wave of grief for people I never knew. Their lives had been sealed away beneath concrete and time, but there was nothing accidental about this box. This was a message, a lifeline from the past, a prayer hidden beneath the stairs. I didn't know who they were, didn't know what happened to them, but I could feel their hope, their desperation, their belief that someone, someday, might find this and remember them. And somehow, that someone was me. My hands trembled as I lifted each item, studied each photo. I felt like I was reading a diary without permission, like I'd opened a door into a private world that had been shut tight for almost a century. But I couldn't look away, because suddenly, this wasn't just my house anymore. This wasn't just my story. It was ours. I spent the rest of the day in a kind of daze. The box sat open beside me on the porch, its contents laid out on an old towel like sacred relics. Every now and then I'd glance at the photos, trying to memorize their faces, as if learning the shape of their features might unlock something hidden in my bones. It was the back of one photo that stopped me cold. Written in faded, slanted cursive were the words, "For when better days return." 6 words. That was it. But they held the weight of something enormous. Hope in exile. A whispered promise sent forward in time. I turned the photo about over and stared at the man in the picture. His eyes were dark, intense, protective. He had his arm around his wife, his hand gripping her shoulder a little too tightly, like he was holding on to more than just her. I couldn't stop thinking about them. Who were they? Did the kids grow up? Did they survive the Depression? Was this box a goodbye or a time capsule waiting for someone like me to finish the story? Alana came out later with a glass of water and a curious look on her face. "You've been out here for hours," she said gently. "Everything okay?" I showed her the box. Her face softened as she sifted through the contents. She didn't speak for a long time. Finally, she whispered, "Do you think they buried it because they were leaving or because they were staying?" I didn't have an answer. That night, after we got the kids to bed, we sat cross-legged on the living room floor, the box between us. We took turns studying the items like archaeologists at a dig site, like priests decoding scripture. There was something sacred about it, reverent. And then I asked the question that had been twisting in my gut all day. Do we keep it? Alana looked at me sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do we have the right to hold on to it? To keep it like it's ours?" She didn't answer right away. She reached for the folded newspaper and smoothed it out carefully, eyes scanning the ancient headlines, her brow furrowed. "It's not about ownership," she finally said. "It's about witnessing, about remembering." Her words sat with me all night. Because the truth is, I felt like I was carrying something now. a responsibility. This box wasn't treasure, it was trust. Someone had buried it deliberately, placing inside the fragments of a life that deserved not to be forgotten. And now somehow it had ended up in my hands. That night I dreamed of the man from the photo. We were sitting on the porch together, silent, watching the wind move through the trees. He didn't speak, but I could feel his presence, solid, heavy, worn down by life, and yet still hopeful. When I woke up, I knew something had shifted. This wasn't just about home renovations anymore. It wasn't just about breaking cycles or building new ones. It was about honoring the past that lived beneath our feet. Some legacies aren't meant to be inherited. They're meant to be remembered.
Sleep became a fragile, fleeting thing after that. Every night I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing the faint creaks and sighs of the old house like whispers from another era. The box sat at the foot of our bed, covered in a towel, untouched, but never forgotten. I couldn't stop thinking about them. The man with weary eyes, the woman standing tall despite the heaviness on her shoulders, the little girl with her crooked bow, her brothers standing stiff like they'd been told to be still. They haunted me, not in a scary way, but in a way that made it impossible to move on. I started dreaming in black and white. In one dream, the man from the photo stood in my kitchen reading one of the newspapers from the box like it was hot off the press. In another, the little girl sat on our front steps, tracing the cracks in the porch like she was trying to read them. Every dream left me with a feeling I couldn't name, somewhere between guilt and purpose. On the fourth sleepless night, I got out of bed and sat in the living room, holding the photo that read, "For when better days return." I read those words over and over until they started to blur. Why now? Why me? Why this house? I told myself it didn't matter, but the truth was I couldn't rest until I knew who they were, knew what happened, knew if those better days ever came. By the end of the week, I was sitting at the local library, thumbing through dusty census records and land deeds, chasing names that had no faces. It was a long shot, I knew that. But the past leaves breadcrumbs, and I was willing to follow every one. I started with the address. Our house had changed numbers over the years, something I discovered through old property maps in the library's archives. Once I had the original lot number, I pulled a microfilm roll from the 1930s and spent an entire afternoon scrolling through decades-old newspaper clippings, real estate ads, obituaries. I lost track of time. Finally, I found a name tied to the property in 1931. J. Whitmore. Whitmore. It sounded familiar, like something you'd read in a history book, but I couldn't place it. I kept digging. There was a birth record for Margaret Whitmore in 1925, a school photo from 1938, a marriage license from 1946. My chest tightened as I traced the arc of a life that may have belonged to the little girl in the photo. The crooked bow, the stubborn pride. But then, silence. No death record, no obituary, just a gap, like the story had ended mid-sentence and no one bothered to write the rest. I found a phone number for the local historical society. I called them the next day and left a message explaining what I had found. The box, the photos, the coins. A woman named Diane called me back. Her voice was warm, but cautious. She said, "You may have something important. We don't get calls like this every day." I told her I wasn't looking to make a spectacle. I just wanted the family remembered. She said she understood. Invited me to bring the items in when I was ready. But even then, I wasn't. Not yet. Because despite all I'd learned, I couldn't shake the feeling that the story still wasn't whole. I could find names and dates and records, but what I really wanted was to know what they felt, what they feared, what they prayed for the day they buried that box. I sat on the porch that evening, the box beside me, listening to Ella and Micah play in the yard. Their laughter drifted through the air, sharp and clear, a sound too pure to belong to any other time but now. And I realized something. The family who buried this box, they never meant to be forgotten. They buried it hoping someone like me would find it, someone who would care enough to look. Their hope didn't die. It was just buried. And now, finally, it was being heard.
The day I met Mrs. Langston, everything shifted. She was in her late 70s, a lifelong resident of the neighborhood, and still sharp as a tack. I've gone door to door, asking around like some kind of time traveler in work boots. Most folks didn't know anything, or weren't interested, but Mrs. Langston did. She said, "I remember the Whitmores," her eyes softening like she was unlocking a vault that had stayed sealed for decades. "Lived right where you do now. 3 kids, real proud family, even when they had nothing." I asked what happened to them, and she shook her head slowly. "They lost the house during the Depression. Government took it. Man tried to fight it, but, well, no one was listening back then." She went quiet, looking out the window like she was watching the past roll by. She said they disappeared after that. Folks said they moved west. Some said they split up. No one really knows. I thanked her, heart heavy, and walked back home with that name, Whitmore, echoing in my head like a warning and a promise. That night, I sat on the edge of our bed and looked around the room. We had a roof, but it leaked. A kitchen, but half the cabinets didn't close. A foundation, but it cracked every time it rained too hard. And then there was my bank account, barely breathing. I had put everything into this house. I thought I was doing something noble, building a legacy, breaking cycles. But standing in the same rooms the Whitmores once walked, I couldn't help but wonder, what if I'm no different? What if I'm just another man who tried too hard to fix things he couldn't afford to save? That night, I stared at the ceiling and imagined the other man doing the same. Jay Whitmore, watching the world cave in around him, trying to smile in front of his kids while everything slipped through his fingers. And for the first time, I wasn't just haunted by their story. I was living a version of it. The next morning, I took the coins from the box and lined them up across the dining table. Each one worn, smoothed by time and touch, once worth more than their monetary value. I looked at them like artifacts of a life built on faith and fractured by forces too big to control. And that's when it hit me. These coins weren't treasure. They weren't savings. They were resilience, proof that someone tried to hold on to hope, to bury it like a seed, not for themselves, but for someone like me. I thought of my father, a man who ran from every hard thing in his life. I thought of the eviction notices we used to hide from neighbors. I thought of my mother crying in the car, trying to make a pack of crackers last 2 days. And then I looked at my son, Micah, small and curious and already smarter than I'll ever be. I thought of Ella and how she asked last week if we'd have to move again. That was the moment I knew. I couldn't afford to let history repeat itself. Not theirs, not mine. We carry what we're given, and sometimes what we're given is pain.
But if we hold it the right way, if we pass it on gently, it becomes something else. Perspective. The Whitmores didn't just leave behind coins and photographs, they left behind a lesson. That survival isn't just about holding on, it's about what you build after the storm passes.
The day I walked into the Historical Society with the box in my arms, I felt like I was carrying a heartbeat. Diane, the woman I'd spoken to on the phone, met me at the front desk. She had kind eyes, gray hair pulled into a tight bun, and the kind of calm presence that made you feel like you weren't crazy for caring about things most people ignored. We sat down in a quiet room lined with old documents and photographs, and I carefully unpacked the box. She leaned in, slowly, gently, taking in each item like she was greeting an old friend she hadn't seen in decades. She didn't say much at first, but her eyes told me everything. "These are extraordinary," she finally whispered, "not because of their rarity, but because of their intention." I nodded, my throat tight. That's what I kept thinking. It wasn't just buried, it was entrusted. She looked up at me, eyes glassy. "And you're the one who listened." We spent the next hour cataloging the contents, the coins, the newspaper clippings, the photographs. She asked if I wanted to donate them permanently or loan them for display. I didn't even hesitate. Keep them. Tell this story. She smiled, writing down my name, asking if I wanted to be credited in the exhibit. I told her no. This isn't about me. It's about them. Before I left, Diane touched my arm and said, "You've done something rare, Marcus. You didn't just find history. You honored it." That night, I stood in the front yard as the sun dipped below the trees, casting long golden streaks across the new stairs I'd finally finished. They weren't perfect, a little uneven in places, and the wood still needed sealing, but they were strong, sturdy, built with purpose. Alana joined me outside with a cup of coffee, wrapping her sweater around her tighter against the breeze. "It looks good," she said, nodding toward the steps. "You should be proud." I was. But not just because I'd built something. Not just because the porch was finally safe for our kids to run across without tripping. I was proud because the house felt different now. It wasn't just old wood and worn-out windows. It was layered. With memory. With meaning. The Whitmores hadn't lived here for nearly a century, but in some strange way they never really left. And now they never would. Because we'd spoken their names out loud. We'd told their story. We'd made space for them in the present. And that's the thing no one tells you about history. Silence is a kind of burial. But remembrance is resurrection. The kids came outside just before dark. Ella asked if they could sit on the new stairs and eat their popsicles before bed. Alana said yes, and I watched them cake their seats, small legs swinging, sticky fingers clutching melting sugar, like it was the most natural thing in the world. They didn't know how much had changed. But I did. This house, this porch, these steps, they were no longer just mine to protect. They were part of a story. And now that story was alive again.
The day we finally moved the furniture into the house, real furniture, not just blankets on the floor, felt like a quiet kind of celebration. There were no balloons or toasts, just the hum of life filling in the corners. Alana lit a candle on the kitchen counter. The kids picked out which drawers would hold their snacks. And I stood at the front door, staring at the rebuilt stairs like they were the finishing touch on a long, unfinished sentence. Everything felt different. But it wasn't the couch or the fresh coat of paint or the working oven that made it feel like home. It was the story. The box was gone now. Donated, preserved, documented. But its absence was never empty. In its place,
On a narrow shelf by the stairs, we'd framed the photograph with the handwritten message on the back, "For when better days return." It sat next to a copy of the exhibit brochure Diane had mailed us, which now featured a full write-up on the Whitmore family. Their photos were displayed behind glass at the Historical Society, their names no longer lost to time. I caught Ella looking at the photo one evening after dinner, her little brow furrowed, a spoon of ice cream forgotten in her hand. "Dad?" she asked. "Who are they again?" I crouched down beside her and told her the story. I told her about a family who lived here before us, about how they faced hard times, like the kind we hope we never do, but still believed in the future. I told her they buried hope in the ground, wrapped in coins and paper and faith, trusting that someone would find it when the time was right. Her eyes got wide. "They buried treasure?" "Kind of, but not the kind you spend, the kind you remember." She was quiet for a long moment. "Are we the treasure now?" That question undid me in a way I didn't expect. Because maybe we were. Maybe we were the proof that something better had returned. That what they hoped for, a future with light, with love, with laughter echoing through hallways, was finally standing on the porch they left behind. I kissed the top of her head and whispered, "Yeah, I think we are." Later that night, I stepped outside alone. The air was cool, the skies soft with stars. I stood barefoot on the new stairs, my hand resting on the railing I'd sanded and sealed with my own 2 hands. The wood was still rough in places, but it held. It would last. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. I felt held by something older, deeper, a connection that reached back through time and forward into my children's future. This house would still need repairs. Life would still bring worry. But we were rooted now, not just in soil and boards and paint, but in memory, in gratitude, in the strength of those who came before. I closed my eyes and breathed in the night air. Home, I realized, isn't just where you live. It's who came before you, what they survived, and how you choose to remember them.